What's up everyone? In this video, we're going to wrap up these videos about how to use Payload CMS and Next.js for SEO. We'll cover Robots.txt, sitemap.xml, and I'll include a simple example or two of schema markup for our post collection. Before we get started though, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and getting notifications so you never miss when I release a video about Payload CMS, Next.js, and more. If you'd like to see the code that I use in this video, there's a link to the repo in the description. Now, let's dive in. In the previous two videos, we covered the SEO plugin that is provided by Payload CMS, and then created the code needed to render that SEO information on a Next.js front end. I only included the information that's provided in the head tag of your website or app, which is only part of the picture when it comes to SEO. In this video, I'll use Next.js to render some of the more secondary aspects of technical SEO. Of the three concepts we'll be going over today, creating a robots.txt file is the easiest, so we'll start there. All you'll need to do is add a robots.ts file to your app folder. Then you're going to import type metadata route from Next. And for this first example, we're going to allow all crawlers to see our website, but not our admin route. Once you import the type, export a default function called robots and assign the type metadata route.robots. Open up the function and set a new const called URL. And we'll use the get server-side URL utility function we created in the last video to ensure we're programmatically setting the proper URL for the sitemap. So we'll use get server-side URL here, and then we'll return a new object with rules, and open up another object which takes user agent, which we'll set to all using this wildcard. We'll allow it on all routes except our admin route. We can then, under rules, set a sitemap to tell search engines where to find our sitemap by setting URL/sitemap.xml. So we can save this, navigate over to our local host 3000 robots.txt, and see an example of what this renders out to be. If you want to be more granular in the permissions you give web crawlers, you can do that by changing rules to an array. So we'll do that by wrapping this first object in an array, changing our user agent to Googlebot. We'll still allow all routes, but we'll disallow our admin route here. And underneath this object, we'll open a new one with user agent set now to an array where we'll send in bingbot and one of the web crawlers for an SEO tool called SEMrush. So we'll also include SEMrush bot here, and we won't let these access any part of our website. So sitemap doesn't change, and all this does is it tells Google, hey, it's okay for you to look through the entire site, just avoid admin. And for bingbot and SEMrush to say, hey, you're not welcome on this website, so please don't crawl anything. So now when I save this and refresh our robots.txt, we can see how this renders out. Next up is the sitemap.xml. For smaller sites with a very small number of pages that are logically organized, you may not even need a sitemap altogether, but you can also just add a static sitemap.xml file to your app directory and use the standard structure of a sitemap. However, if you want to programmatically generate a sitemap using code, you'll want to add a sitemap.ts to your app directory. Here, you'll import type metadata route from Next, and then we'll export a new default async function called sitemap and assign it to the type metadata route.sitemap. And we can open the function. Since we need to use async so we can access payload, we need to wrap metadata route.sitemap in a promise. Now, here's where payload comes into the picture. At the top, we'll need to import get payload from payload, as well as the config from payload config. Then in the function, we'll initialize payload by setting a new const called payload and await get payload with the config. And we can use this to get all the documents we want to include in our sitemap. We only have a posts collection, so we'll work on that now. We'll create a new const called posts and set that equal to await payload.find our collection posts. And we'll set limit to 0 to return all documents and include an empty where query to ensure we don't have any constraints on the query at all. You could add a field to your collection to enable or disable a document in your sitemap and use that as a query for your sitemap as well. This isn't necessary if you want all your pages and posts to be included, but no, it is an option. We'll then use this to map out the objects we need for the sitemap. At the time of this recording, the only recommended sitemap fields that are not ignored by at least Google are location, last mod, and references to your localized content. Last mod is only used if Google can verify that the value is actually accurate. Fields like priority and change frequency are ignored by at least Google, but I can't speak for all search engines. Since we need our URL to set the location item for sitemaps, we should also pull in the get server-side URL utility function. Set a new const called URL to get server-side URL, and we need to make sure that this imports correctly. Next, we'll return an array and use our spread operator for posts.docs.map, where we're going to take our slug and updated at fields as arguments, and now we can use this to define our sitemap. First, we'll use URL and set that property to be our URL slug, and then we'll set last modified to be a new date based on updated at. You can do this for any collection you have that you'd like to include. For example, if you had a pages collection, you just need to query that collection. Do the same steps as before and include it as a new item in the array using the spread operator. So, for example, if we had a const pages, we could just underneath do pages.docs.map, etc. But we don't have pages, so we can't do that example here. Once you save this file, you can now load up localhost 3000 and go to sitemap.xml, and we can see all of our XML file here and all the pages that we have created. If you want to add in localization information, you can do that using the alternates property. You can then add a languages object for each of your localized fields. I can't show an example of how you might do this in a project, since how you handle localization may be different from how I would do it. But let's say we have an English and Spanish localization, and we use EN for our English localization and ES for Spanish. Our slugs in this example won't be localized. All we need to do is add an EN to our URL, and then under last modified, we can add an alternates, languages, and then set ES, and then we can set our URL to be ES/slug. So now we can save this and refresh, and you'll notice that the styling of the sitemap goes away. But if we look in our source code, we can see each URL formatted properly and easily readable by search engines, and the alternate locale being populated correctly. The last SEO concept I'll go over in this video is structured data, or schema, for Google's rich results. While schema.org is large and may include information you want to use on your website to make it easier for search engines to understand, there are only a few structured data types that Google will use to create rich results like images and breadcrumbs. I've included a link to the description to the documentation that Google provides regarding this. We'll do two quick examples, article and image. Let's create a new directory in our components folder called schema. We'll then create a new TSX folder called index. Since we'll most likely use these schema types across different paths, we'll want an easy way to reuse and reference this code. So we'll store all of our schema in this file. At the top of our index.tsx file we just created, we'll import our type, post, media, and user from our payload types, and we'll start with article. We'll export a new const called article schema and open up an arrow function. This article will take props from the post type assigned to it. We can then use return and then add the fields we want to use in the article schema. None of the fields are required except the context and the type, but we'll want to include as much as we possibly can. So now we'll type in our context, which is going to be our schema.org website there, and then type is going to be blog posting, since we're using blog posts here. You can also use article or news article. We'll then add a headline, which will be props.title. Underneath headline, we can add date published and date modified. So these are not required, but Payload gives us created at and updated at, so we might as well use them. So we'll use new date, props, dot created at, and then again we'll use a new date props dot updated at. We can then include an image URL in an array using the image property. So before we do that, above the return, we can create a new const that we'll call image and set it equal to props.meta.image, and we're going to set the type as media. We can then use this constant to set the image property with an array, and we'll use our S3 endpoint environment variable we set up in a previous video to serve this image. So we can do that by using process.env.s3 endpoint / image.filename. Lastly, we'll add our authors using the author property. We don't currently have a dedicated author field in our post, so let's create that first. We'll go to our post config. We'll remove the users array field we have currently, and then we'll add a new relationship field before all of our tabs, and we'll call this field authors. We'll set the type to be relationship. We'll set relation2 to be users, and we're going to set in the admin our position to be sidebar. Since we expect we'll have multiple authors in a post, we'll want to include has many and set that to true as well. Once we have that configured, we'll also need to go to our users config and remove our posts by user join field that we set up when going over join fields. Once we do that, we'll need to run payload generate types to make sure we have all of our types exactly how we want them. Next, we'll go back to our index.tsx in our schema, and we'll set a new const called authors and set it equal to props.authors as user set as an array. So we are expecting multiple authors coming in. Then we can set our author property in the schema to be set to authors.map and use it to map through our author. We'll use author for what we're mapping on, open an arrow function, and then add the necessary information, which is type, which will take person, name, which we'll use as author.name, and URL. For URL, we'll use our get server-side URL utility function under a const called URL. So new const get server-side URL that imported properly. And then we can use our URL authors, and then we can use author.slug. Now, an authors route doesn't exist right now, but it makes sense that this would be the page. You can also use a social media link by using the same as array instead of a URL property. We'll do that here by using same as and then using one of my social media links, which is this YouTube channel. This is also a great use case for having social links included in your author collection. Now, there are a couple of caveats here. The dates you use for updated and created at may not be in the correct time zone, so you'll want to handle that if you want to change from the default time zone from Payload. According to schema.org, blog posting can also take the text of the article. Google doesn't use it, so you may not think it's worth it, especially since you would need to create a function to take your lexical rich text field and transpose it into something that's readable by web crawlers. If you want to see either of these things done, whether the time zone change or changing your rich text field into plain text for things like this, let me know in the comments. Next, we'll work on our image schema. We'll export a new const called Image Schema. And this const will also take props, but it'll take it from media. We can then return the fields we need for the schema markup. You only need to include content URL and some type of credit, license, or copyright notice. We'll use the option called credit text, since we won't need to create a new object in order to use it. First, we'll need to create a new text field in our media uploads collection called credit text, so we can populate the required field. So we'll go to our media collection, and underneath alt text, we'll just create a new text field that will be called credit text. And since this is required by the schema, we'll also make it required on the back end. Now we'll spin up our server and navigate to our localhost admin UI, go to media, and we'll select the one image here that's not broken and add a credit text here. And we'll just say that it's my name. Once that's saved, we can come back to our schema file and finish our image schema. So now we'll return context schema.org. We'll then have a type. Instead of blog posting, it'll be image object. And then we'll need to add content URL, which we'll say is the same as this image up here. But instead of image, we can just use props since we're working with media directly. And now we can add into our credit text property our brand new props.creditText field. We now have an article and image schema ready to be used. To render the schema, let's go to our page.tsx in posts slug, create a new const below our post const that we'll call schema, and we'll set it equal to an array. And this array will include all the schema we want to include on this page. So we have our image schema and we have our article schema. So in each of these, we need to include our post.meta.image as media, and we need to import our media type. And then in article schema, all we need to do is include post. Contrary to popular belief, schema does not need to be included in the head tag, and it does not need to be all in the same container. There will be no impact to performance or recognition by Google either way. So we'll use the default Next.js script component and not even try to get it into the head. So we'll use script, which we need to import from Next. We'll set our type to be application LD plus JSON. And we can set a strategy, which can be whatever you want, but I'm going to use lazy on load. Lastly, within the script tag, we're going to pass in JSON stringify, and then we can include our schema here. Now, before we navigate to a page, let's make sure we have all the required information in our post. So we'll come back to our blog posts, open the post, and we can see in our SEO, we need to include an image for our image schema. We have a title, and we don't have authors, so we just need to add an author. I can publish those changes, and now we should be able to go to localhost, posts, blog 1, and this should load up with no problem. Now we need to check that it worked. We can open up our code inspector. We can see a bunch of scripts down here, but if we scroll down a little bit, we can see that one is here with the type application LD plus JSON and lazy on load, just like we set. So if we open this up, we can see all of our schema information here. You can then validate that this works by right-clicking on the script, copy element, and then you can go to the rich results test validator for Google, and then paste the code in and click test code. After a couple of seconds, if everything goes well, you can see here that articles and image metadata have both passed. You'll see that there are non-critical issues detected in our image, but that's because we included only one of the 5 potential required fields. So this is passing regardless of the warning here. There's even more you can do with programmatically setting your schema in this way, like creating your own image object which automatically adds the image schema to each of your images, or building out more advanced schema using the schema.org documentation. Schema, along with sitemaps and Robots.txt, help search engines understand what's on your site, how your site is built, and which parts of the site the crawler is allowed to interface with. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might find it useful as well. Check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and getting notifications for whenever I drop a new video about Payload CMS, Next.js, and more. If you have suggestions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.